And there we go. We're live. Shoot.
Do you do like an introduction or something?
No. Contour office hours. Hi, everyone.
Yeah, the blue-green deployments, we've got a team trying to do that at the moment, and they're seeing elevated 503s when they update their configs. So they've got services running, and they're trying to do essentially, I guess, a kubectl apply with a different ingress HTTP config, and then during that transition, they see elevated errors. And I haven't looked into this super closely, but that was just a high-level report that I got. But I'll go back and look at that recording to see if we're doing it wrong.
But, yeah, I guess I'm not sure if that recording has it or not. I know we created like an agenda of ideas, and we may or may not have hit those ideas, I guess. So I'll have to see. I'll look back too and see. But how are you doing the blue-green? Is it with weights, or are you just swapping the services? Okay.
I think they're trying to use weights. Yeah.
Okay. Because I know someone else reported something similar to that. I mean, maybe it was you folks. I'm not sure. That they were doing a blue-green and they saw 503s. I meant to go try that again. I know that the one change that we made was before, when we looked at services and endpoints, we would load all the services and all the endpoints into Envoy, and then you would have a route pointing to them. I think we made a change to only load then the endpoints that actually are referenced from services. So say you had 1,000 services in your cluster and you only reference one of them from ingress. Today, we only load now in later versions with that one set of endpoints for that one service into Envoy, because it was a lot of overhead and a lot of extra churn that we're trying to avoid. But I'm just wondering if it's a blue-green, if adding the second one at a weight, if the second service isn't getting added to Envoy fast enough. And I was going to try and test this to see if we need to add the second service with a weight of 0 to get it loaded into Envoy maybe, and then scale the weights. I'm not sure. I'm just thinking out loud because I know that's the only change that we really made that might affect that.
When did that change come in? Which version do you know?
Is it 1.8 maybe?
Oh, so a long time ago.
Yeah, it's not.
That's not a long time ago. We're on 1.8. Sorry.
Two releases maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I can double check. Yeah, I'm not sure. It wasn't super new, but it wasn't super old either. Yeah, it was fairly recently, I guess.
Yeah, you've already given me some ideas. I guess I'll go back to the team and understand exactly how they're doing that. But my understanding was existing services trying to change the weights, but I could be wrong on that. I'll go back and check.
Okay. Yeah, because the other way to do it is to swap the services out and just your route references service A, and you update your kube control apply and swap to service B on the fly.
But that's all or nothing there, right?
Right. That'd be all or nothing. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess you're doing canary or the blue-green. I guess blue-green should be a big swap.
Yeah, I guess they're probably, the terminology is a bit overlaps. I guess I think they're interested in canary. So how do we route, some percentage and change that percentage?
I see.
Over time. So I'll go back and double check on that.
Yeah, I'll test that too. I know that came up. Let me find that issue. And we can track it in the issue somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have another one if you're up for it.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I don't think we have anything else really planned.
Okay. And I can, there is an issue for this, but it's come up again, is UDP support. And I know we had a call a long time ago about this, and Envoy supports UDP proxying. It's improved over time. I think they've actually taken the sort of beta flag off it. And I know it's not straightforward to enable, but I just wanted to know if there's been any further conversation about UDP.
I'm not sure if there has. I know Nick did some digging into that to see some things. I'm not sure if it was a few folks or someone, but no, it hasn't come up recently.
Okay.
Yeah, I would expect UDP support to come through service APIs, but the chat window, if you're unfamiliar with service APIs, where's the chat window? And if you actually go to service APIs, that link I gave you, and you go to the APIs v1 alpha 1 and UDP route type, as Steve mentioned, Nick's taking
Okay.
the lead on service APIs implementation. I don't have, or maybe I do. I'll post another link in the chat window of the discussion related to service APIs implementation. But just from an upstream standpoint, if you have time, maybe to take a look through
Yeah, it's a good
the
idea.
UDP route API type, and just familiarize yourself with service APIs.
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
So that's a good idea. I'll definitely do that. But so that would lead me to think that, Contour support would follow service API development. And not necessarily at the same time, but I guess it would make sense for service APIs to start being used and deployed. I'm not entirely sure what the target is for that in terms of Kubernetes releases. But the idea is
service APIs is implemented as custom resource definitions. V1 Alpha 1 is being released here in a couple weeks. And although it's a V1 Alpha 1, there's been a lot of effort put into it. And so I would consider it a real strong V1 Alpha 1, but of course it is still alpha. But I think long-term for Kubernetes, service APIs is the roadmap of the future for services in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
It's a transition that I think everyone will eventually go through. But yeah, again, familiarize yourself, and I know the community is really looking for input, from users out there, and there hasn't been a whole lot of input for UDP. If you look at the different API types, you'll see a lot of focus around HTTP, TLS, of course, right? And again, on the implementation side, Nick is taking that lead, and myself and others here in the community are working with him to try and kind of figure out those details.
Thanks. That sounds good. I'll go read up on that. I have another one.
Yeah, go for it.
So this one's interesting. So we've got an image repository, Artifactory, which is pretty common, I guess, in enterprise. And we have people, we're seeing errors. So in the past, they were running on a cluster, and they had Nginx, and we were running Contour and Nginx in parallel. And they were primarily working through Nginx. And then we've removed Nginx. Now we're down to single Contour, which is great. But now they're seeing some errors with long-lined customers. So people in different theaters like APAC, long-lining artifact pools. So this is primarily humans on Docker Desktop, humans on doing npm installs, and some Yarn stuff as well. And Yarn is a mixture of humans and build process. And they're getting these end of file errors. And it doesn't necessarily happen on huge image pools either, or artifact pools. It can be small ones. But the common scenario is that it's generally higher latency networks to faraway locations. Now, interestingly, we've done a bunch of research on this, and this has been a long-standing problem for the community in general, including with Nginx back into 2017. I can find reference to this. So it's not something specific to Contour, but it looks like the move to Contour has exacerbated or made it worse. And what we found so far is that there's a bunch of guidance around how to set up Nginx. Well, there's guidance and folklore. It seems like it's more art than actual, hard recommendations. But it's generally, the recommendation is force HTTP 1.1 and disable buffering. And if you don't disable buffering, then you've got to start playing with the temporary file size space configurations in Nginx. There's a whole bunch of knobs that people have been trying to tune around either turning buffering off or enabling it and configuring it differently so that the bits get through to the end. And the error specifically is a EOF end of file error. So essentially, the logs in Artifactory look okay, the logs in Contour look okay, but the file that ends up on the receiving end doesn't compress properly or decompress properly. So that's the background. And so, we've got a ticket open from a work point of view, but where I think this is going to go is, are we going to be able to expose knobs to configure buffer settings for routes in Contour? Because you can't do that today, is my understanding.
Yeah. The first thing I thought of was like response timeouts, but
we've tried all that.
Yeah, I just as you were talking through it, I wasn't sure, given they were, latent connections far away.
So we've modified the response timeouts. There's still a lot of confusion around what idle timeout means. Like, that's not set at the moment, but would that help? I think the answer is probably not. The other one we're going to try is active health checking to the backend cluster. But again, I don't think that's going to work. Everything we've seen so far is it's a buffering issue on high latency or high jitter networks.
Yeah. I'll have to see. I don't think we have an issue for the buffering stuff.
I'll raise one.
Okay.
Soon. So I just wanted to raise your attention to that because it's definitely an issue for us.
And if you could share any of the logs or anything or any of the details, that would help too. Just around that would be great. I know you've looked into it, and at least it's good that it's not unique to Contour. But yeah, like you said, it's made worse now. So
it's made worse now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have sent all that stuff across to as part of like a work ticket, but happy to replicate some of that's particularly the buffer request into a GitHub issue with some background as well. I was going to just one other thing I was going to say on that is that we've worked out a way to expose Envoy metrics to our internal customers. Which has been helpful, but also confusing for a lot of people because, as we know, the Envoy metrics is an enormous list of metrics, and the documentation for them is really, really cursory, like single sentence type stuff, very hard to work out.
Yeah.
The thing we're finding in this scenario is there's a particular metric, which I'm trying to pull up now, which is essentially connections with active requests destroyed. And that particular metric is through the roof in this scenario. And what we think is that somehow the end of file issue on the other side is not entirely clear where it's been generated, but essentially the metric in Contour / Envoy that is really elevated is that particular request. But again, 503s aren't there. So it's basically somehow closing the connection during active requests. So I'll put that into the ticket as well, or into the issue.
Is all this routing over HTTP, or is it using any of the L4 stuff? Okay.
HTTP.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting.
I was hoping you were going to tell me that you've had another customer that's experienced this is how you fix it.
Yeah, no, I know someone recently just wanted to do something similar, but they created their own. They wanted a different port. I think what they needed was a way to pass like SSH connections through to some backend. It was similar but different. It wasn't the same, but they needed a new listener basically in Contour or an Envoy, like an L4 listener, but that's not the same.
Okay. So I think that was I've dominated all of this, but there were the other things that are on our mind at the moment.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, I'll have to see. Something. Let me think. Let me see if I can find. I thought I saw something recently about that as well, though, about a registry. Let me poke through. but no, nothing comes to mind in terms of that specific thing of the EOF errors, unfortunately. But
Actually, I have one other question. So related to this, I need to go and look at the documentation, but today we're using as recommended as part of the config, the kitchen sink Envoy image, right? Which has got everything compiled into it, including the buffer filter. Is there a way for us to modify or invoke the buffer filter through some sort of bootstrap override, so we can essentially actually configure this outside of the Contour control plane, or is that not work?
I'd have to see. It depends on where it gets added. I think those get added to the connection manager.
Yes.
In Envoy, so that, and those are dynamic through Contour. So
right.
I don't think you could do that through the bootstrap.
I think you're right.
Yeah. But if they're like the other user wanted to add that, an L4 listener, and we could do that through static resources, that was easy. Yeah, unfortunately, I think you're not going to be able to. I mean, what we could do, just to see if it works, we could build out, a custom contour to play with that would set those values, and just to see if it fixes it or not, before we go through the trouble of actually adding all the knobs.
Yeah. Okay.
We've done that.
Well, look, I'll put together. I'll put together the information we have so far, and I'll do a GitHub issue, and we have sent a bunch of logs and stuff across in terms of the work ticket.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
Yeah. Very cool.
Michael, while we have you here, I'd be interested to get any further input that you have on rate limiting. I know we talked about it at the community meeting a few days ago, but if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, interesting. So there's definitely interest in rate limiting. I just jumped off the CNCF. There's an end user group in the CNCF. It's been running for quite a while now. And so all the CNCF, it's open to CNCF end users. And it's a really, really good forum. And there's a bunch of people sharing failure stories and all sorts of stuff. And it's turned into a really interesting space. And so one of the guys at I always forget the name of the company. It's a fairly high profile European e-commerce site. It'll come to me. But they've put a topic out there for conversation, which got a lot of votes around rate limiting in general for Kubernetes, which also applies to ingress. And so how do you rate limit things like the actual API server, but how do you do rate limiting in ingress? So I just mentioned that in that there's a lot of interest in this space in general. And then in terms, for us, the rate limiting, I need to go back and look at the documentation that you guys have put together about how to leverage rate limiting. We haven't sort of kicked the tires on that yet. And as I said, it's Envoy hasn't helped here because there's 3 modes to my knowledge: the external rate limiter, the L4 local, and now the L7 local, which was added by Pinterest. So yeah, it's an area that we need to do some more research into.
Okay, yeah, because we're sort of trying to figure out which subset of those modes or all of them are users interested in, and then as you get into the global or the external rate limiting service, that opens up a whole new set of questions around, are folks going to run the Lyft reference implementation of the rate limit service, or are they going to bring their own, and how do they want to configure it? So we're just trying to get some more information from folks who might actually use it about sort of what they'd be interested in seeing.
Yeah, I know I've mentioned this before, but the Lyft rate limit service, it seems like quite a few people are using that. And I've done some testing on that too. So today, the documentation for I think it's now Envoy proxy rate limit service. It's been moved out of the Lyft repo, but it's the Lyft one. The documentation today says the default mode for the rate limit service is actually Unix domain sockets connection to Redis. But that is broken. That doesn't work out of the box. So if you actually try and follow the documentation for the rate limit service to use Unix domain socket connection on Redis, it doesn't work. And I raised an issue on this, and I've got an internal build where I've fixed that. Someone broke it, a long time ago as part of the PR. which points to a lack of testing. But anyway, the challenge with the external rate limit service, though, is that it's gRPC connection, I think, to the Redis service. And if that Redis service is too far away, or there's latency, or the load's too high, then your rate limit service starts degrading itself. And so the only way I found to actually make it work at high scale was to have Redis on a Unix domain socket with a rate limit service, so that you bypass the network altogether. And once you do that, then you can really scale the thing and pump a huge amount of traffic through it. But I think the external rate limit service is going to be hard for people to tune reliably, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but you've got a bunch of different factors at play there to make that work at scale.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think we have any sense of, are there other implementations out there that folks would plug into Envoy, or is the Lyft one kind of the only show in town?
There are other ones. I mean, there's another one. I've got like a bookmark list of some of these. There's another one out there that someone wrote in C++. That was, I don't know if it's been used with Envoy, but it's a rate limiting service. And I believe there's some other people that have their own version of this as well. Because people are definitely doing rate limiting with Envoy. But I think Lyft is that implementation is the primary method that I've seen, but there are others. It's a bit like control planes. People have their own and they're not open source.
Right, yeah. And I think that, the other angle there is, so kind of how you configure the actual rate limits. So there's kind of the split model where in Envoy you configure the descriptors, or like the rate limit keys, to send to the service, but to define the actual rate limits themselves, you do that in the rate limit service configuration. And so from a Contour perspective, you kind of have two different places where you need to configure things. So we're just trying to wrap our heads around how folks would actually want to configure that, and whether it should, Contour should have APIs to define rate limits themselves, or whether that should just, be left to the rate limit service and users are kind of on their own to figure out how to do that.
Well, you just actually triggered another thought too, is that the Lyft rate limit service borrows the very sort of early days of hot restart approach for Envoy, which is still there, of course. But so in order, I believe, to change the rate limit config, you've got to do like a symlink swap on the config for the rate limit service, which once you're into Kubernetes land is actually not that easy to do.
Yeah.
Because now you've got to start fiddling with file systems and symlinks inside containers, which you may not have access to do. So that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about making, like, if we make it like the Lyft one and a first-class citizen in Contour, we could make it very seamless to set up, to actually configure the rate limiting, putting aside the tuning and performance issue. But if we keep it a black box, like external auth is today, then there's a lot of overhead in terms of the operator trying to configure it and make it all match. And when it doesn't work, it's not going to be very clear why it doesn't work and that sort of stuff. So that's what we're trying to balance, like how flexible to make it in terms of letting people bring in their own service versus, making it super, it's that whole balance between the more configurable it is, then the harder it is, and that sort of thing.
I mean, that's why I guess I was hopeful for the local rate limiter, the L4 and now the L7, because that in theory will be completely contained inside of Envoy, and therefore hopefully could be configurable in one place,
right,
from a Contour point of view.
Mm-hmm, correct.
But it may not be as versatile as an external, but it might be good enough. And it's also, you can do it per route, I think, right?
Yeah, you
Which
can.
is what you need to do in a multi-tenant environment. So we want people in a shared Contour to be able to set up rate limits for their routes, which ideally.
Yeah, from what I've seen of the local, it just doesn't give you very many knobs or like dimensions to rate limit on. It's kind of you rate limit the entire route based on total number of requests coming in, and that's about it.
I think that would solve, quite a few of the use cases, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, if you're looking for kind of basic DDoS protection, like you'll get it you'll get it through that. It's really only the more sophisticated use cases where you have a need for the external one.
I mean, the mock-up that I did internally using the Lyft service on the Unix domain socket with Redis was running my own pod with an Envoy and Redis inside of it. And that's like, so Contour, pass through Contour, not pass through, but go through Contour. And then I'm essentially running that as a rate limit service inside my namespace for my services. So it's like, run your own rate limit service. And that works. So if you wanted something more sophisticated beyond the local in Contour, maybe, people could do whatever they wanted, I guess, after that. It's more work and it's more things to run, but it would solve for those more sophisticated use cases.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, I definitely appreciate your thoughts. And if you look into it
Yeah,
anymore
we'll
and have
kick the
any other
tires.
ideas.
We just haven't had a chance yet.
Thanks.
I'm interested in discussing status, if that's okay.
Yeah, we can do that. What status are you
Um,
referencing? Go ahead. Just
Yeah, let me just give you a quick little background here. So I'm working on the status sub-resource for the Contour operator. Let me actually, if it's okay with everyone, just share my screen.
yeah, for sure.
Share. All right. So with this PR after it merges, we should have this kind of behavior here. So this is an instance of a Contour, which represents a Contour deployment. And the deployment consists of a deployment resource managing the managing Contour, a replica set for the Envoy daemon set, and we reflect the available pods from the Contour deployment status. And as long as there's at least one available pod, or I'm sorry, the available pods is from the Envoy daemon set. So as long as there's at least one available pod from the Envoy daemon set, we consider Envoy available. And available replicas, as long as there's at least one replica, we consider Contour available. And with these two available, the status condition of available is true, right? Contour has met its minimum availability. There was one other piece of this puzzle that I was interested in implementing. I think at this point, it may be a follow-on to the initial available status condition implementation. And that is the secrets, right? Because we can go ahead and say, okay, great, Envoy is running, Contour is running, but there's no kind of guarantee that they're able to communicate. And I feel like, the cert gen job that generates the TLS secrets for Envoy and Contour is kind of a key piece to verify and reflect that as part of the available status condition. One of the challenges we have is that in order to make this work, we're watching, or the operator is watching events for this daemon set and watching events for the deployment. And these events occur in a different namespace. And so the way that I'm able to stitch this together is by applying like an ownership label to the daemon set, to the deployment, that references the Contour that owns these two, right? And so this Contour that owns this daemon set and deployment is Contour sample in the default namespace, but I can create a contour instance in different namespaces, and again, those reside in a different namespace. And so, the challenge, how this kind of relates to these secrets, is the challenge that I have is Contour doesn't necessarily own those secrets, doesn't generate those secrets. It's a certain gen job that generates those secrets. And the labels that are used are pretty minimal, like app equals Contour or something like that. And so I just wanted to kind of call that out as kind of a challenge to include the availability of those secrets as part of this available condition. I don't remember what the issues offhand, but I do know there is an issue in Project Contour related to kind of following the Kubernetes best practices for labels, as opposed to just the kind of the app equals Contour. And so if we can, if the cert gen job was a little more flexible on, when I go ahead and call the cert gen binary, I know there are some flags, but maybe one of the flags is, okay, what labels do you want to apply or something like that? Or, maybe that's one approach. But I just wanted to kind of call this out and take it up for any kind of feedback or thoughts that anyone may have.
Yeah, well, I guess regardless of I guess there's another option where you could deploy Contour without certs, which is not recommended, but you wouldn't have to in a way. But that's
the point.
Outside of it. Technically, you could add the insecure to Contour and not require them. But I'm thinking that the readiness probe on Envoy shouldn't let that pod be ready until it can talk to Contour. So if you started up Envoy,
good.
If you started up Envoy and say Contour wasn't running, or say the certs were invalid or incorrect somehow, then Envoy should not go healthy. So it shouldn't ever get traffic because it hasn't received any configuration yet from Contour.
And you said that's a readiness. What about a liveness probe? So at some point, right, everything's up and running. At some point, Envoy can't talk to Contour. How is that issue surfaced?
I don't know that we have liveness probes, because those can get tricky in terms of like restarting when you don't want it to restart, especially with ingress or with this edge proxy. If your envoys start bouncing by themselves,
right,
that could be bad for your traffic. At the same time, obviously, if it's missing configuration updates, then that's just as bad. But Envoy will reconnect if it can't communicate with an XDS server. It should restart, or not restart, but reconnect somewhere. I don't believe we have readiness or liveliness probes. Just looking real quick. We do have liveliness probe in Envoy.
I don't see one on the Envoy container itself.
Or is this? Yeah, liveness probe. But there's no readiness. There should be a readiness probe.
I'm seeing a liveness probe on the shutdown manager. Is that what
I'm sorry. Yeah, that's the wrong one. My bad.
And then the Contour the Envoy has a readiness, but not a liveness.
Yeah, we don't have a lot. Yeah, so there isn't a liveliness today. I don't know if there is. I guess what would make
another approach that we can consider, and it's an approach that a colleague of mine is working on a different project, and this project has been using status conditions for a long time, and we see that, okay, they're good. We use status conditions, we use events, but they're still not good enough to be able to say, this environment is truly functional. And so with this other project, my colleague is implementing a canary controller that actually, when just basically like a canary environment that's always running, that really uses minimal resources, and is just essentially constantly verifying that a curl can work through through the proxy and hit a canary type of backend. And so I just kind of called that out as that's something that maybe we can consider as well, to say, okay, when the contour operator creates an instance of a contour, it also creates an instance of kind of a canary environment that is, periodically testing that traffic can't flow through the environment. And if it doesn't, then it surfaces, a degraded type of status condition.
Yeah, that could work. We'd have to figure out. That would only test what connectivity from where, who's making the call request. I guess the operator.
You have to look at the details, but yeah, I know what you're getting at, where it's like, okay, well, where's the client actually at?
Yeah, because if you made it through like the external load balancer, then and if that was broken, then you would be restarting Envoy. It depends on what layer you need to validate. I guess we're trying to validate is Envoy receiving updates from Contour, and is it serving traffic properly? Which is all you really should want to test at that level, I think, because otherwise everything external to Envoy is a different probe.
Yeah, and it becomes like another status. I mean, ultimately, you want to know, like, end to end, are things working? And I think that's kind of the purpose of this kind of canary setup, is because, again, at the lower layers, everything could be working fine, but ultimately, it's like, okay, is this, end to end working as expected?
Sure. Real quick, in your example, you have available pods and replicas. So pods represents Envoy.
Yes.
Okay, and then replicas was Contour.
Yes.
Okay.
And these are the API changes you see for Contour status. Available replicas has been there. I've updated the Go docs a bit here. Available pods. But I think maybe I know where you're going from, is should this be available contours and available envoys as opposed to replicas and pods? Is that what you're thinking, or am I being presumptuous?
Yeah, no. Yeah, at first I wasn't sure what was what. It might be nice to somehow change them. So I keep losing my internet, I think. I'm not sure if it's Zoom or me.
And the Go docs get into this, right? Steve, like, you see available pods, observe the available envoy pods. And so I guess it just comes down to is that suffice, or should this be available contours and available envoys? And it's something that's been in the back of my mind with this as well. So maybe when you get a chance to take a look at this PR, kind of think about that, and we can discuss it. Yeah,
for sure. Sure. I know there are stats too in Envoy related to connections and stuff, like XDS connections. I know Contour exposes a couple of those. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, and really what we would want to do with kind of the status approach is have something like within Envoy that would cause the daemon set to, that particular pod in the daemon set to fail or become degraded. I mean, daemon sets, and maybe this is part of potentially moving off a daemon set and into a deployment to manage Envoy, is because we get better status conditions compared to what a daemon set surfaces. But yeah, from the operator standpoint, we really want to look at those resources that manage, like the deployment for Contour and the daemon set for Envoy, and use the status that's surfaced from those objects to reflect the status condition within the operator.
Yeah, there's a link I just put in chat. There are stats for the management server, and if you scroll to the bottom of that list, there's one that says control plane connected state, and it's a Boolean, so it's 1 if connected, 0 if disconnected. So that tells you if that envoy is connected to a control plane, aka Contour.
Right.
And there's a bunch of other things in there, but at least that would be helpful if we could if that stays 0 for so long, I don't know how long what's reasonable, that could cause a liveliness probe to have it reset maybe.
Yeah.
To say, hey, Envoy's not connecting to something somewhere, let's kill it because it's not getting updates. But
Yeah, that'd be nice. Yeah, let me take a look at this, and maybe I'll put together an issue on this topic, discuss it further.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. Yeah, we'll have to see. That's great. That's awesome work. It's great to have the stats and stuff too. I know especially in this operator world of having all those different versions running across your cluster, knowing what they're all doing would be great from that CRD. So.
Yeah, and it's baby steps. I mean, it's just the available condition, but even as I've been banging away at this stuff for a little while now, it's just nice to be able to look at the contour and see, okay, everything should be up and running, and then I deploy my own Canary, that card application. Am I pronouncing that right? Is it card or KUARD? Does anyone know how that's pronounced?
Yeah, Cord.
Whatever the name is, that's what I've been using as my Canary, and but yeah, it's just even the simple available status condition has been nice. So when you have time, take a look at that PR, and it's definitely one of the last big features for the V1 Alpha 1 release of the operator. And then we'll iterate and continue to evolve the conditions that are surfaced to the operator.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd like to add, the way I see it, metrics are really good for providing a lot of fine-grained information. Conditions should be a little bit more coarse-grained. Is this thing available or not, degraded or not? You might have a few additional status conditions, but I don't think you want to have the status conditions duplicating the information that's reported in metrics. And maybe metrics could be inputs, but I think it's useful to have metrics kind of as a separate, more fine-grained, something where you can get fine-grained historical information, more detailed information.
Yeah, kind of what I was thinking from what Steve shared, and would appreciate your input on this, Micaiah, is like, okay, this management server connection statistic, right, is actually kind of creating, I don't know if it's a liveliness probe or something where it's like, okay, if Envoy will, the Envoy pod will kill itself or restart itself if it can't connect to this management server over a period of time, over a period of attempts. And then, if it's managed by deployment and one of the replicas in the deployment is unavailable, then we would eventually surface that status condition either through available status condition if there's only if there's no replicas available in the Envoy deployment, or a progressing or a degraded condition if one of the several replicas is unavailable. That's kind of what so I think, to your point, I think it was kind of meant to be as an input that would be used to surface a condition to the resource that's used to manage Envoy, like a daemon set or deployment. And then the operator would continue to use the status conditions of the deployment or the daemon set to surface the appropriate status conditions.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, that's a great point, Micaiah. I think that, I wasn't recommending us to replicate the metrics into the status. It was more of using that metric to drive maybe a liveliness probe, because we don't have a probe today to deal with liveliness. It's just readiness, and that readiness probe looks at Envoy exposes a ready endpoint to tell it if it's ready or not. And I think it's always ready as soon as it connects at least once. I think if it loses connection, it won't go unready, or it won't fail that probe, I don't think. So there's, I guess, a potential for it connecting to an XDS server over time and then losing connection and never reconnecting, which will be bad. So this could be a way to expose that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just popped in, this is the readiness probe that I see, which I don't remember offhand, is 8002, is that like the metrics port or?
Yeah, that's a listener on is that list? That might be stats. Because we have a static configuration to expose some things out of the admin page. Because we don't want to expose all of it from the admin page, because you can kill Envoy and do some nasty things with that web page.
And then here's the liveness probe.
I think that's for the shutdown manager container.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what I thought too. I saw that and I was like, wait. And Steve double checked
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, you're right.
That was in case, the shutdown manager became unhealthy and couldn't monitor for active shutdowns. So, yeah, that'd be great. I think that'd be interesting. And everyone always cautioned me on liveness probes, because you can be very destructive with your pods. But at the same time, it's beneficial, I think, if we can find a good way to implement it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe we just start off with pretty conservative approach to it.
Sure.
But yeah, I would think like if Envoy can't connect to Contour, within 5 minutes, there's something wrong there that we should feel pretty confident about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Michael, you're still on the call. Do you have any thoughts on this topic at all? I'd be interested to hear from you.
No, I don't really. Apart from readiness and liveness probes scare me. But I'm actually less involved with the sort of deployment of Contour like this than I am with the customer facing stuff. But so sorry, don't have much input.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
I'd be interested in specific examples where liveness probes have caused problems. But I can understand if you set your timeout too low, your threshold too low, yeah, you might have some flapping. But though I see it, I mean, you need to be a little careful. But it's a pretty core Kubernetes feature, and it's important in general, especially with Operatus. But in general, you want the platform to be able to heal itself where it can and report if there's an error, whether or not it can fix it. Liveness probes are an important part of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of blog posts that point out some of the sharp edges where people have been caught out, and I think some of the sharp edges are understanding of what they actually do, but there's a bunch of those blog posts that are like, how to shoot yourself in the foot with these probes. But I think you're right. But yeah, I think you have to be careful.
Yeah, and I just linked in an issue associated to this liveness probes. I'm still reading through it, but just thought I would share that with everyone.
Oh yeah, this one. I started to do this one. I think I never finished it. Yeah, this was a liveness probe on the gRPC endpoint. To actually do more things, yeah. Yeah, I think we had on Contour itself, I have a silly little, is Contour healthy if it can make a query to Kubernetes? Just to see if Contour can't talk to Kubernetes, then it's just as bad. You're not going to get updates to Envoy through Contour. So yeah, we should look at this one as well. This is a good point.
Hey, yeah, I need to drop. This has been really helpful. I know I dominated a lot of the early conversation. I have one parting question, and I think I know the answer. Is there any impact to Contour in terms of the ingress object going GA in 1.19, I think it is? There shouldn't be, right? Because it's operating as a separate CID.
Well, Ingress v1 is still in the core API. And I think it'll automatically upgrade the old v1 beta 1 versions when Contour sees them. There are two new fields. There's an ingress class field now in the spec.
Yes.
And I think there's also a path type. So
yes,
you can define
I think path type is mandatory, right?
I don't know. I didn't think it was, but maybe it is. But I know you can define, is it prefix or path? Those are two things that Contour have not yet implemented, those 2 bits. There was an issue with ingress class that I think we've since worked out. So we just have to add those 2. But I think from just how V1 Beta 1 was structured, it should all work fine with Contour.
Okay. Cool. That was all. Thanks. It's been
Yeah,
good.
no worries, thanks.
I'll work on the end of file Artifactory thing.
Sounds good. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Cool. What else there to talk about? Did y'all want to talk about the namespace thing? What was that issue about? Should the operator create objects in the same namespace or have them be in different namespaces? Wasn't there?
Yeah, let me see where that issue is. Here we are. Copy.
Yeah, I think it's 95.
I can just get the right windows here. Yeah, let's see the latest. I got a sense from James' comment that, yeah, and I probably caused some confusion here. Yeah, I don't think, Micaiah, correct me if I'm wrong here. I don't think necessarily the namespace has to be restricted to Contour operator. I think maybe I just use that as like an example, but to be able to just restrict Contour to a single namespace is what I would like to see.
So how does that work in practice? If someone wants to create a Contour, they've got to have access to that admin namespace, whatever. We need to come up with a name for that.
Yeah, and I think what we would do is just restrict reconciliation on on the operator to reconciling contours in a specific namespace. And so, if someone tried to create one as part of the status conditions, which maybe I need to update, is by default the condition would be unknown. And we would we would document it as well so that users understand that it's restricted to a namespace, and maybe surface that as well.
How would you? So I guess then you need to create RBAC to create those resources, I guess, in those namespaces or in all of them, because you wouldn't know upfront which namespaces the operator can create resources in. Right. So like say you're running in the operator namespace and you create a Contour CRD there. A CRD then should go create a deployment and a daemon set in, say, the default namespace. Right. So we'd have to give that service account for Contour operator permissions to write deployments and daemon sets in the default namespace, right? Yeah.
Start video. How do I share? Oh, share again. Right here. So, so my thinking. Oh, this thing's kind of annoying. My thinking here is, we'd have a, we've got some flags that we set on the operator. One of them we would add is, namespace, Contour namespace or something along those lines. And that would be the namespace that's fed into the Contour config. That Contour config gets passed in when we create a new Contour manager. The reconciler would then feed that gets this config, right, would be configured so it's only watching contours from that specific namespace. Now, that's the contour object itself, but we know that through the API, we're not talking about restricting this namespace here, right? That's, to me, one of the features of the operator is that you can go ahead and use the contour object to create a contour instance in your desired namespace. Right. And all the RBAC for this stuff is already set up, but we would essentially just be restricting. All right, so if someone tried to create a contour object in any namespace they wanted to, it wouldn't actually be reconciled by the controller. And so it'd be something that we would document to say, as you start to, trying to think how we expose this.
Yeah, I don't remember. Is the CRD, is it namespace or is it global? Let me go look. I forget now.
It's namespace scoped.
Is it namespace scoped? Okay.
Look at this issue. Stop sharing. Go back to the issue. I think from a scale standpoint too, right, is right now, the reconciler is looking at, for status, for example, right? Or so we're watching. Let me go back here. Let me share again. Share screen. Is it manager? Right. So we're watching all deployment, all daemon sets, across all namespaces, and we're looking for these two labels, right? That the contour owning name in the example that I showed earlier, it's contour sample, and then that namespace, right? So when we when the deployment gets created, when the daemon set gets created, these labels are applied, but we're this reconciler is still having to look at all these different objects. So I do think it also kind of simplifies things, just being able to lock these resources down to a single namespace. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm wondering what would happen if an operator user essentially requested that Contour be installed in a namespace that user didn't have access to. Right, so they in their Contour custom resource, they specified a target namespace that was one that user themselves didn't actually have access to. Would that be allowed?
It would, because that user is not themselves creating the namespace or creating the resources like the Contour deployment in that namespace. It's actually the operator that's doing that. And if we go to the operator, we see, let's see here. So namespace, secret server. The operator can get, list, watch, delete, create, update namespaces, secrets, service accounts, basically everything that it needs for like all the RBAC stuff. And so the user doesn't need to, because the operator is doing it. But to that point, the operator and everything in the operator's namespace needs to be locked down because of these highly elevated privileges of the operator, because the operator is essentially acting like an admin, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, I think, if part of the maybe one benefit of the alternate approach where the Contour custom resource is created in the namespace where Contour is going to be deployed is that then if the user doesn't have access to that namespace, then they can't create a Contour instance in that namespace, and therefore, they can't get a Contour installed in that namespace. That might be useful for some folks, but if you're saying that, essentially if you have access to create contours, then you can get them deployed in any namespace in the cluster, then that's just kind of a caveat that folks need to be aware of.
Yeah, and that's kind of a use case I was trying to describe in this issue 95. And Steve, if you do have a couple of minutes, maybe you could kind of jump in as well. But that's kind of what I was trying to describe, in the sense that the only people that should be creating instances of Contour are like admin type of users for this kind of use case that you described, right? Is because Contour, the operator, is highly elevated privileges, the Contour object itself that is basically the vehicle to start all this automation in the back end should really be locked down. And we can do that, right? We could do that through RBAC, or we can maybe take a simpler approach and just say, okay, specify the namespace that is the only namespace allowed for Contour objects to be reconciled.
Yeah, I know. And in my head, I guess I misread the original design. In my head, they were namespace scoped in so say you own the cluster, right? You would deploy the Contour operator, get it up and running, and then you'd say, all right, it's there, and then I'd go create my own Contour CRD, which would create my own instance of Contour. And Steve on his team would create his instance of Contour to manage for his applications. And that seems counterintuitive to have multiple ingress controllers on the same cluster, but this way we're self-managing our own infrastructure in a way, and then the Contour operator is doing the work behind the scenes to do all the provisioning and stuff, which we don't have access to. We only have access to manage our own instance. But I see it, what you're describing as well, which makes sense, of saying, hey, there's a cluster operator which is going to deploy it for me and for Steve, and then we would have our instances there for us to use. And
it's two different models. I know even from the service APIs community, it's that same struggle where it's like, okay, is this a self-service model, or is this more of a restrictive model? Right. And so, that is definitely the same issues, and I know being involved in service APIs from the start is like, okay, it's part of the reason of having multiple resources and almost having a bi-directional association between the resources, right? And so an HTTP route is not actually bound to a gateway without a gateway also, allowing routes from that particular namespace to be bound to it, right? So it's kind of bi-directional relationship between those different resources. And maybe, we get to that point. I think the way it is set up now, and Steve, Chris, I think you provided a real simple use case there. Is if anyone can create a Contour, they can go ahead and say, I want to create it in some specific namespace, or create multiple of those Contours in a particular namespace that they don't have access to. And to me, that seems a little bit concerning.
Yeah, we addressed that in issue 95, where there's been some discussion about that. Specifically, if you want to control where a user can tell the operator to create the Contour and Envoy, there are solutions to that: custom admission controllers, gatekeeper policies. And I would be comfortable saying that's something we can address later, or leave to the user to address using one of those solutions.
Yeah, and that's
reasonable.
It does, and that's I guess that's similar to what we're doing in service APIs, right, Mikhail?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think we don't have to solve the end game now. I guess it's good to understand these now, so that we all know what we're going towards. How the functionality is going to look eventually, and we can solve these things for folks. So and I think we could still support both if we wanted to. if you ignored that namespace field, you know, you could just
Going back to the
deploy it.
question about,
Sorry, go ahead.
sorry if I spoke over you, I think my audio cut out. Going back to the issue of, is the contour CRD namespaced or should it be namespaced? I'm wondering if this use case is one we want to care about. Say I have, maybe I'm a developer or some kind of, not a cluster admin, but I have some delegated permissions. I want to run my own instance of the operator and point it to, tell it to watch a specific namespace that I own, watch for contour CRs in that namespace, and manage my, so I have my own custom operator or my own private operator instance managing my contour CRs and my contour and Envoy deployments. Is that something that makes sense or would be a use case we want to accommodate?
So you'd have multiple contour operators running in the same cluster? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess if it's going to watch specific namespaces and only allow those objects to be created in specific namespaces, then I guess that can work. But if it's going to watch all namespaces for those CRDs, then you're going to need that owner tag or that some sort of reference to know who owns what object. So they don't, you know, both create the same set of resources or try to, you know, operate on the same objects. I don't know. Do you folks have use cases to having both like that, or would you only ever have one operator running?
We've talked about supporting that use case, but we haven't actually implemented it in OpenShift.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. To me, typically you'd only have one operator running, but
I think the more
I don't know.
common use case is a single operator with multiple instances of the contour CR.
unless you, yeah.
Right, and it's a real basic use case that keeps coming up even with service APIs is right, like public and private, right? So we've got, you know, internet facing contour deployment and then a private one. But another use case, you know, that you mentioned, Steve, is you know, being kind of fully delegated and letting, you know, teams manage their own instance, their own contour CR.
Yeah, like I worked on the Elastic operator years and years ago, and that was how it worked. The idea was that you just created an Elasticsearch CRD in your namespace, and then the operator went and, you know, handed you a database, you know, an Elasticsearch cluster, configured how you wanted it based on, you know, how many replicas and daemon or data pods and all those sort of things. Doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. That's just, I guess that was my mental model, that a user would create a CRD in their namespace to then get their own instance of that object. But I understand both ways. So I don't think that has to be the way that helps you explaining it though. So thank you for that. Yeah. So I don't know where to go from here. I guess it's already designed that way, so we can just keep moving on maybe. I think it works. I don't think it's wrong. It's just depends on the use cases we want to solve. You know what I mean?
Yeah, if we still have time, I wouldn't mind going through the V1 Alpha 1 milestone of the operator, but I don't want to kind of hog the meeting. So we kind of keep this in the background if there's other topics that other people would like to bring up.
Sure. Welcome, new folks, John and Stephen. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. I'm going to step away for just 10 seconds. I have to check on some kids that are by themselves. So I'll be right back in 1 second.
We've got 3 Steves on our call now, so that won't be confusing at all.
No, we got this. Man, I can relate to the herding of the children. I've only got one child in my house, and that alone, when you
enough
say
to keep you
plural.
on your toes.
Oh man. That's the one thing that nobody seems to want to talk about when we've made this switch to doing school from home in a lot of places is what that means is classroom management. Yeah, slides back on to the parents. I can't imagine trying to be a 7-year-old or whatever age and like focusing when like your teacher's this tiny little square. Sorry. It's tough.
I agree.
So did you
So,
all
yeah.
have stuff to talk about? Sorry, I missed what y'all were talking about. So.
No, we were actually commiserating with your situation, or presumed situation. Yeah, this was like you and me chatting real quick, Steve. I don't know if it was on the weekend or on Monday or whatever, but like, so the question on the table was about understanding the rationale behind the design choice, and this was a while ago. The document I was reading was like 2019 about the TLS certificate delegation, where objects want to refer back to a certificate, that certificate, and using a formatted namespace for the name of the object. So it'd be namespace / and the secret name.
Yeah.
And just to help, like, part of what could be confusing to me is that I'm actually relatively green to Kubernetes, relatively speaking. So there might be something fundamental I'm just like missing, and I'm fine reading the manual. But I tried to do my homework, and that's why I'm showing up. Is did my best, and I'm still confused. The heart of what's missing for me is in that design doc that said, well, we explored alternatives where you could actually use more of like a V1 object reference shaped referral to the secret using like namespace and name as 2 separate fields. And then the rest of the sentence, like I get lost. And it says that like this was rejected because it allows for effectively ... man in the middle attacks. So I really don't understand why is it that like when we go from 1 string to 2 strings that creates a vulnerability.
Yeah, I was just going to pull up a something to draw on. I think that'll be helpful.
Sweet.
Yeah, because it's easier to. Yeah, so I think a lot of this is just history in a way. There's no the TLDRs. There's no valid reason to why it is. Just sort of how it turned out to be. So let me see if I can do this. Okay, can you all see my slides? My my silly slides. Let me see. I'll just get a shape.
This is going to turn into a talk. This is how this happens.
Oh yeah, for sure. All right. So typically, how ingress works. If I have ingress, right? Let me see if I can make this a little bigger or something. That doesn't help. Just got to make the font bigger. If you had an ingress object like v1 beta 1 or v1, whatever that is, and you wanted to have a secret on there, or you wanted to terminate TLS, what you would do is you would add. Let's make it. I don't know what this can be our secret. You would create a secret in Kubernetes, and that would be your key and your cert in there. And then you would reference that. I don't know if this is going to make sense or not. In my head, this is going to be super simple, but you'd have a name, right? And that name would reference this thing here. Can I make it connect? Like that. So and you would say, all right, the secret had a name, and maybe the name was, name is TLS secret. TLS secret. So secret. Yeah. And then in this ingress object, you would say, hey, use TLS secret to look it up. So Contour would basically pull in this ingress object. It would pull in the secret, and then it would actually pick out the cert and the key and would pass that off to Envoy, such that when a request came in, it would use those secrets to actually terminate TLS at Envoy. So that's how ingress happened, right? And that was a single name field, because in ingress, every ingress resource had to have a reference to that secret. So this is one of the issues. So if this ingress was in, namespace A, and you had a second ingress object for the same domain in, say, namespace B, you had to have some sort of reference to the secret twice, which was kind of annoying for folks, right? So I know some folks would have a tool to replicate this secret across namespaces, right? Because this is just how ingress used to work, or it works today. When ingress route came around, and therefore HTTP proxy, our Contour CRD, what happened was the secret could only be in one place, because you had this root namespace, right? And in our CRD, it's kind of like a hierarchy thing. So you have a root, which defines the domain name and the secret, and then all of the children objects can live in different namespaces through inclusion and all that sort of stuff, which is a different talk. But the idea is that now you only had one place where this secret here had to live. So if we make this an HTTP proxy, you can't have a second domain name somewhere else, right? So this can only be in namespace A. And then you could have children somewhere. So I'll put, oops, can I copy the whole thing? Yeah. So now I have, this is child, right? And then this guy would have like this. And this would own like a path. Let's say path is /blog. That's my example I use everywhere. Right. So, so when this is in namespace B, maybe. Right. So through inclusion, we can put this proxy somewhere else in the cluster, and then Contour will kind of smash all this stuff together and end up with one. Because Envoy doesn't know or care about Kubernetes or namespaces. All it knows is about, I just need a routing config. So Contour will shove all that together and make one routing config. So I'm getting to your question, I think. So this was a name, right? And we just copied that from ingress, because that's how it worked before. Because in this example, the secret had to live in the same namespace where this root proxy lived. It couldn't be anywhere else. Well, then came along was we had a user who wanted to let users self-manage their own roots. In this case, this root one here, which I guess helps if I put like local domain name, and this is stevesilica.com. They wanted folks to be able to manage their own root resources, but they didn't want to give them access to keys for whatever reason. So maybe this secret here is a wildcard or something, a wildcard cert, which you could be pretty malicious with if you had access to it. So that's how we came up with this delegation bit, right? So the TLS delegation essentially let you put this secret here in a namespace. And this is getting hard to read now. Namespace is admin. That my fonts are too big, I think. And then you would reference that through this name here. So then you would say, hey, it's an admin /TLS secret, right? So we had to give it away to find this, because this was only a single name. So
I think Steve froze.
Oh man, and that was the punchline. This is the part where
consciously.
you come on. Oh, there we go.
There we go. Now you're back.
We lost you, Steve.
I must be. Am I better now? Yeah, I keep losing connection every now and again. It's weird.
Yeah, we lost you for like 20.
Okay. So here you reference. You say, hey, it's in this namespace in the secret name, and if there's a delegation, so basically the delegation model, the certificate delegation model, tells the Contour, hey, someone consciously wants to take this secret and let someone else use it. You know what I mean? If we didn't have delegation, and this is what was in that issue there, if I could reach into any namespace and grab secrets out of it, that's kind of breaking the boundaries of namespaces in Kubernetes, right? Because your namespace is supposed to be your little world, right?
There's a reason why you can only refer to a secret within your own namespace.
Right, yeah. And if we just blindly let you look out across different namespaces, in theory, you could maybe grab a certificate for another domain name or something, and then start serving traffic maliciously because you don't have access to it. You shouldn't have access to it. But the TLS delegation model is telling the admin, hey, I want to consciously delegate this secret so they can be referenced. So I think given that the history, that because this was only a name field and then we added this feature after the fact. That's kind of why we added the namespace into that field. So there's no good reason. I think if we had designed it up front, we might have done that. But that would also lead people to believe that they could just reference a secret from any namespace without the delegation, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I see the overall. Thank you. Okay, so I'm understanding the overall picture. That I put a link in the chat to the section that I'm confused by. So I'm with you all the way up to this point. And when I'm keying in on, I don't know if I'm looking at if I'm interpreting it the wrong. So it's the alternatives considered section.
Is it this one here? Am I still here, or did I freeze up?
Yeah, no, you're good.
Okay.
You're good.
All right.
Just trying to give you space to like load that up.
Yeah. So this is what that is. So this is saying this isn't so much the storage of namespace name in the object. It's more of like Contour has access to all of the secrets in the cluster, essentially. And if we just allowed folks to reference them through this namespace name without the delegation on top of it, then there could be an attack. Like someone could, I could grab secrets from, Steve Chris's namespace.
Oh, this is saying like if we just didn't even have a TLS certificate delegation in the first place.
Right.
Oh,
yeah. So
I thought this was about an alternative to the design of the TLS certificate delegation. Okay.
No, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so it's like, so if we don't do this TLS delegation at all, we could just reference them directly, and then this is saying, well, that would be bad because you could potentially hijack certificates that you should not have access to.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the source of my confusion. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's low tech. Like you said, it was just that was the way that was the format in which those names were made. There isn't a strong drive to separate out namespace and name into separate field or keep them together. It's just how it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
And actually too, because I know this is a CRD here, but this actually works with plain old ingress as well. So back here, if this was an ingress resource, you can actually do the same thing. You could have I had these two ingress objects here. Whoops. So this could be the same domain name, different paths. This could be /blog, and this could be /foo. Foo is everything. We can essentially get the same. We can actually use TLS certificate delegation with ingress because Contour is processing everything together in one place. So Contour processes ingress objects, and then it processes HTTP proxy objects, and now it's going to process service APIs objects. So it'll layer all those different things on top of each other and then create one Envoy config at the end. So in theory, you could have this work today where you have the secret reference this way. Whoops.
Let's see.
And that would still work because Contour is processing all of it behind the scenes, which is actually kind of cool because now you don't have to duplicate the secret all over the place. But in ingress, that secret name is just a single field. So yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. It's just how it grew up, I guess, is the reason why. That's it.
Okay. All right. Well, that clears that up for me. The origin of the question came from someone else who was actually doing working on the networking parts for CF for Kates, I think, the CF networking bits, and they're looking at, I guess they're exploring, I don't know where they're at with that, but they've been using Istio, and I think they're looking into like migrating to Contour.
Okay.
And so they're using a tool suite called Carvel that lets you like template YAML stuff, and then there's this tool called Cap that's like a kubectl with like weighting features in it.
Carvel.dev.
So I'm a maintainer on the Carvel team, and so when somebody came by and said, "Hey, how can I tell your deployment tool to use the namespace as the first part of the name,
Yeah.
we were looking at that saying, well, object references have this shape. There's like a canonical definition
Hmm.
in the Kubernetes code, like the V1 object reference, and then there they say, well, don't use this directly.
Yeah.
It's like there's so many fields that like people don't use and blah blah blah. It's like that makes sense.
Yeah.
But so far this code base has been making that assumption that well, the namespace would be at least in a different key.
Gotcha.
And so there's some things that we do like automatic resource versioning for config maps and secrets, so that you will, with each deployment, you always get or you would get a fresh deployment when you update your config map, for example. So it'll manage and rev the version for you.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. It solves
but
that. Yeah.
But it doesn't work well if like the secret reference is all together.
Mm.
So anyway, that's what Michaela got into, and I was just watching, listening, and
Yeah.
just trying to understand. That's all.
For sure.
Cool.
Cool. Yeah. Well,
Cool. Thank.
glad we can clear that up. Hopefully that doesn't take you too down. You can get around that issue, I guess, is what I'm hopeful for.
Yeah. We'll be looking into it because we definitely want to, have support like that. So
Yeah. Very cool.
anyway, cool. Well, hey, appreciate the time, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to drop off, get back to my pair, but
Yeah. No
that was a
worries.
very clear explanation. Appreciate
Good.
it.
Good. Yeah. Thanks for coming. It's nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Take care.
All right. You too. See ya.
Cheers.
All right, Daniel. I think everyone left. Who's this? Micaiah?
Cool. Yeah, I was just getting ready to make a comment on
Yeah.
an operator issue here. Yeah, if there's nothing else, maybe share my screen, share. And let me go to issues for milestone V1 Alpha 1. Post this in the chat window. Where is chat participants? Or chat. These are the issues for V1 Alpha 1. We see the release date for V1 Alpha 1, but as we've discussed, this is really tracking the release of Contour, kind of get a sense that it's going to be a little bit later than December 4th.
So we might release Contour this week. So
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Understood, but we're not ready for that. That's why we're
Right. Yeah.
We're tracking the following release.
Okay, for sure. Yeah, because we talked about before last time we were going to move it to like right before KubeCon, which is only 2 weeks away. I get it, but yeah, we might try and release this week and then release again. So yeah.
We're definitely not tracking. The next release is 110, right?
Yes, 110 is next.
Yeah. So we're tracking 111. There's no way we're doing 110.
Yeah, for sure.
And as you can see, there's just way too much work. I mean, it'd be nice if we had 50 people working on this, and I would say, yeah, we could do 110, but I think we're going to be pushing it just to try and track 111. So I'm working on this issue that I just submitted a PR for. I think this is in really good shape and looking forward to feedback. So if anyone has time, would really appreciate some eyes on this so we can get the status resource ready to go for V1 Alpha 1, because I see this as kind of one of the big features. But we have kind of all these issues, and I don't know if we necessarily need to go through all of them, but any eyes and input on these issues, and any help, if anyone has any time, feel free to assign yourself and work on them.
Yeah, the number 80 there, I think we have an action, I guess, to build the main image. It's like 2/3 down. Yeah, that one. I think Nick wrote an action or copied it out. It doesn't build a tagged image, but it builds a main image, I believe. Yeah. So we'll have to add a second one to have the tag version come in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Which we should be able to do once we have that. Because so Nick added there's like a Contour bot that we use to push images, and those are baked into the GitHub repo. So now we can just reference the environment variables automatically.
Yeah.
So those should be building now and pushing. Yeah.
And I believe they are. Yeah, because when I test, it's going off of the main tagged image from the Project Contour repo. So
Yeah.
that seems to be working. But to your point, when we release, we need to basically replicate this process for the released tag, right?
Yeah, I think we have an action that builds off of tags. Yeah, so when it sees a new tag get built, it goes and builds a release image off of that in the Contour repo. Sorry, and we can just rip that off, copy and paste it, and then reuse it. I think as part of that process.
I posted issue 80 in the chat window. I'm not sure, Steve, if you want to maybe provide any of those comments here that you provided. Instead of me trying to parse through them.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is good. Container images should come from CRD. Let's see where we're at here. Micaiah, thanks for kind of outlining the way that we kind of see providing these images to the operator. So where are we at with this? So Steve, do you kind of see where Micaiah and I are coming from with not actually exposing the versions of Contour and Envoy to the end user through like the Contour spec, right? The way that I think Micaiah and I share this this feeling, but please, Micaiah, jump in if I'm not representing this properly or what have you. But if we go ahead and just expose these images through to an end user, like through the Contour spec, it becomes unmanageable, and sooner or later users are going to pick different versions that don't work and break, and we're trying to get away from that. And so that's why we're basically saying is, right, if you want to, the operator is going to be released with Contour, and it's like, oh, I want to upgrade my Contour. Well, now you don't even have to upgrade, the deployment or the daemon set, the images there. Like, you're just upgrading the operator itself. And that will match whatever Contour version that's released.
Is there any control over when individual instances of Contour get upgraded? Because the only issue I can see there is if you have a few different Contours deployed in your cluster, as soon as you upgrade the operator, all those Contours are going to get upgraded. So, like, is there any way to do one by one or pause an upgrade or anything like that?
No, I think in that scenario, maybe that's where we get into actually running the different operators in an environment. But no, I mean, it is a valid use case. But I guess it's, how would we be able, like, what's the solution? Again, I'm coming from a perspective of, if we allow users to configure what versions that they want of Contour and Envoy through the Contour object spec, I just feel like at some point people are going to be breaking themselves, and so they're going to be looking to us to say, okay, well, give us a supported matrix, and it becomes just a lot of burden on us to go ahead and be able to say, okay, here's all the different version and upgrade paths that we support of Envoy and Contour, and I'm really concerned about that issue.
Is the operator going to help manage and sometimes we deprecate fields, and I'm trying to think of cases where the operator is going to have to help. No, like version 9 to 10, this changed. This needs to be applied.
You're saying deprecate fields of like an HTTP proxy or what?
I know Steve, what was the timeout thing that we moved around?
Yeah, like we had a timeout field in the root of the Contour config file, and then we moved it underneath the timeout stanza, and now the old one's being dropped. So like, would the operator help with parsing the old field and like moving it into the new field?
So when you upgrade from one release to the next, the operator would support that use case because the operator is aware of the new way to configure Envoy or Contour. And then, as I mentioned in a separate issue, right? So the version of the, or is it at here?
Sorry, really quick. Did you say that this is an API change in the Envoy or Contour config, or is it a change in the HTTP proxy resource?
It's in the Contour config file.
Okay. Well, imagine the operator is writing out that config file. Nothing else should be modifying it, so it should be safe for the operator to say, for this version of Contour, this is the config format. Just rewrite it from scratch, and if necessary, tell Contour to reload it. I guess you don't even need to do that. But it shouldn't need to really do much in the way of migration, or it's kind of level driven, right? It should be able to read in the Contour CR and write out a Contour config map.
Well, I mean, what if someone changed values in that config map, or can they? I guess
they can't. That's not exposed. Now, what we will eventually do is expose certain bits of configuration through the Contour CR, right?
Okay. So if you wanted to like set a timeout or set some sort of a configuration item like that, you just can't today with the
right. But no, I mean, the intent is to eventually do that, and then
okay.
what we would do is make sure that it's backwards compatible as we release, one version of the Contour CR to the next version. And to do that, we need to make sure that obviously the releases are in sync, that we've got CI testing this, and I bring this up because what was it? It was this thing right here, right, that I caught. I think, and this just kind of came to my mind with some configuration value, or this was what a flag that was changed or added that the operator caught. And if we kind of get this automated, and this is what I was bringing up, Steve, through Slack the other day, is like, from the Contour side, not just from the Contour operator, right? So the Contour operator is gonna have a CI job that, and I don't know if it's already there or not yet, but a CI job that, is gonna deploy a kind cluster and then, run the operator and deploy a sample app, all that kind of stuff for every pull request to make sure that things continue to work. But I think from the Contour side, it would make sense as well on pull requests that, an environment stood up using the operator, because I think we would have essentially caught this issue here.
Yeah, we'd love to get the Contour operator to the point where you might look at it and say, this is really the simplest, most convenient way to deploy Contour, even including for a use case like CI.
Yeah, for sure. Is there any way to downgrade? I guess would you just downgrade the operator then? Like, say you upgraded to latest and you found a problem, would you just go back to an old operator version to downgrade, or I'm not sure how I would approach that.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, you would downgrade downgrade the operator, and you get an older operator image that would have that would know how to configure the older Contour version and Envoy version.
Yeah, and I think James Peach kind of asked the same question here, so I'm going to throw this in the chat window too. I don't know, but my comment here that I posted just a few minutes ago, when you have a moment, I think this will help as well. Is because yeah, it's like we're shifting the problem now up one level, right? And you know, and what I'm trying to describe here is like with surface status conditions from, you know, for a particular contour. But then when it comes down to, okay, we need to upgrade the operator and who manages that, you know, there's typically a kind of some separate controller, right? So OLM is operator lifecycle manager that you can take a look at. But these are some pretty good links that give you some background of the approach that we're used to taking and what we're suggesting with the contour operator.
Right.
So when you have time, if you can maybe take a look at these references, and I also XREF 88 here because someone on the Slack channel pinged me after, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago, if we plan on supporting OLM, and it's something that caused me to create this issue, and it was in the back of our mind, you know, more long-term, how we plan on managing contour operator itself. But I would definitely appreciate you to look at some of these references and provide some feedback here.
Sure. That's something that's coming up in 1.10. So they're deprecating the V2 XDS resource API in Envoy come January. So in this version of Contour, we're actually going to serve both the V2 and V3 resource versions from the same Contour server. And what this does is lets you solve an in-place upgrade. So say you had, 10 Envoy pods running in your cluster handling live traffic. Those will all talk V2, right? And then for Envoy to upgrade and use the V3 resource, you change a flag in the Bootstrap config to tell Envoy, hey, I want to talk V3 now. So the idea is that you would upgrade Contour to V10, and then all your envoys would be running, fine, the V2 one. And then you would change the flag on the daemon set to say, hey, Envoy, now roll out the V3 version. So you'll have a gradual rollout. Again, this is for an in-place upgrade. You'd have a gradual rollout of envoys. New instances would connect to V3 as they bounced along, and the old versions would still be talking V2 until the whole fleet got upgraded. Does that make sense? So I guess that would still work.
It does.
That would still work in your operator sense because by default the flag is there now. There's a new flag that has the yeah.
And I pull this up because in that scenario, a user would upgrade to V10 of the Contour operator if it existed, right? Let's just kind of walk through it as an example, right? And everything would work just the way it did, right? Let's say it's OLM that handles the operator upgrade, and if there's any issues, it rolls back, or right, OLM has been doing that stuff for a while, so we feel confident about that. But they upgrade the operator V10, and now there's these flags that are exposed. But the challenge we have is, well, none of this is exposed configurable to a user, right?
Right.
And so what we would need to do as part of maintainers of this is to be able to go into the API, sensor types, right, and spec, and figure out a schema of how do we want to expose, Envoy config knobs, right? And that user would basically say, okay, I upgraded, great. And as part of this upgrade, I now have this new Envoy config knob thing. And one of the config knobs is this, right, resource version, right? It defaults to 2 for backwards compatibility, but I'm now going to set it to V3. Now, the way that things are now, right, is this is on a contour by contour basis. So this user could have multiple instances of Contour in their cluster that they've been running, right? They've got their sample app or sample Contour like I have here, right? And they've got all other ones, right? And so they could, they upgraded the operator. All of these upgrade. Now, we kind of go back to Steve Chris's use case of, well, I want to upgrade some, certain contour selectively. That's where we need to run multiple operators. But in this instance, right, they've got multiple contours all managed by this one operator. The operator gets upgraded by OLM. It's now running V10, and now it's V10 has this new API that allows us to, configure certain Envoy knobs that we need to be very selective about, right? By default, again, that resource versions V2, everything, even though they're on the newer version of Contour that now has this new config flag, they need to go in and set that particular knob through the Contour spec, and then have the Envoy instances start using both V3 and V2. That makes sense?
I think it does. I think in a perfect world, we would upgrade the Contour deployment first and have it be 100% healthy before we'd upgrade the Envoy daemon set. Just because in theory, because what I think that's going to happen is when you apply the new version of the operator, right, it's going to go see, oh, there's a new version of Contour deployment and a new version of Envoy daemon set. And it's going to patch both of those at the same time, right?
Yeah, how do we?
I think, or does it? I don't recall what happens, but I guess in my head, if they patch them both at the same time, Contour is going to start doing a rollout of how many replicas you have, and then the envoys will start doing it. So there's a chance that if one of the envoys gets to V3 first, and there isn't and it connects to a V2, like an old version of Contour, it's gonna fail. You know what I mean? But I guess in that scenario, it's just gonna wait until a V3 one comes alive, I think. So, and this is just an example. I mean, this after this release, when the Contour operator gets released, this won't be a problem because we'll be on V3. But I'm trying to come up. This is a scenario that's happening now that's kind of weird that we haven't had to deal with in a while, I guess. So,
and I think we could handle that in code potentially, where it's like right now, right? Let's see here. Controller.
Or maybe we should make it.
We're ensuring these certain resources, and they're happening serial. Let's see here. Ensure the deployment, then ensure the daemon set. And I wonder, we should be able to build in some kind of logic that, we don't ensure the daemon set unless we can verify the deployment's up and running.
Yeah. I don't know.
And this is actually where the operator could really prove its value. If you have special requirements around upgrades, we can put that logic in the operator.
Yep.
I'm curious, is this the first time there's been something like this where you have a Contour update and you need to make sure you update Contour and Envoy in the proper order?
Yeah, I think this is the first time. I'm trying to think back. I know back in the early days of Contour, the Go control plane changed a bunch, in the sense that the version of Envoy had to match Contour pretty well. They had to go in sync, I guess. So only version 8 Envoy worked with version 8 Contour, etc. But recently, that hasn't been an issue. You could probably run Envoy 10 with Contour 9 or whatever, because the API has been more stable recently. So yeah, I think this is the first kind of thing that's happened where I think Envoy will do the right thing. I think it'll keep retrying. So in the scenario I just described, I think it's not going to matter. It's just your Envoy rollout will be delayed waiting for Contour, which is fine too. I think that's Kubernetes, right? I think that's fine.
Eventual consistency.
Yeah, eventually they'll just catch up, I think. I don't think Envoy will. I'd have to try it. I think Envoy will just try to connect to V3 and it won't find an endpoint, and it'll just keep retrying until it finds one.
Yeah, and it makes me think. I wonder if instead of a daemon set, maybe it's a stateful set. I don't know enough about stateful sets, but it almost sounds like that's the requirement that we're describing. So I'm not sure.
Situations for us, and so users don't have to think about it. They can just apply the operator, and it does it for you. So.
Yeah,
I mean, we're okay.
I mean, there's no doubt we can codify it. that particular use case, we don't have that documented in the operator. Steve, if you do have time, I would love or appreciate your help in maybe creating an issue. There's just no way we're going to be able to do it for V1 Alpha 1, but it does sound like it's an extremely valid use case that we should have on our radar, and could definitely make life a lot easier for users.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it sounds like something by the time we release Alpha 1 V1 of the Contour operator, we're not going to have the problem, right? That'll be in the past for Contour and Envoy.
Right.
So, and we don't know necessarily that we'll ever have the same situation arise again. So I'm not sure we want to invest a lot of effort into preparing for it.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. And if we version the proxy API, if we change that, we'll version that, obviously. So that'll be that. So that won't be an issue for that part. But yeah. Okay.
I think, for me, I am wrapping my head around the fact that originally I was thinking of the operator as this kind of like timeless thing that applied across all versions of Contour and could arbitrarily upgrade and downgrade. But now thinking of it as much more tied to a particular version of Contour. So like each release of the operator is tied to a particular version of Contour and just knows how to get that version of Contour running. And so if we do have these special cases around upgrades, it's totally reasonable to just program that special logic into, one particular version of the operator because it is tied to that version of Contour.
Right. The operator should know how to upgrade from, X dot, the n-1, if it's on version n, should be able to upgrade from n-1 and downgrade from n+1 in case you're trying to do a rollback. Maybe we could do as far as n-2 or n+2, but it does simplify things a lot if the way you upgrade contours, you upgrade the operator, and the operator has that narrow focus.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're running out of time here. I don't want to go through every single one of those issues in the V1 Alpha 1 release, but I just wanted to make everyone aware of those issues, and I'm banging away at them because I really want to make sure that V1 Alpha 1 gets released with 1.11.
Yeah, and I did the Red Hat talk on Monday, the Red Hat Commons. It came up about submitting it to the Operator Hub as well. Once we get
we've got someone that I've spoke to within Red Hat about that as well. So there's plans for that, plans for managing it through OLM. So that OLM reference stuff that I posted here, I think you guys would really like that as a read. But yeah, there's a lot of things going on with the operator, and but yeah, first things first, we want to make sure that it gets released with 1.11 and feeling good about it. But maybe we could use kind of the weekly calls to just make sure that we're tracking and get these things synchronized, because I think as soon as we do, it'll be easier with follow-on releases, and I think it's gonna benefit. Will help the operator, but it's obviously going to help Contour.
Yeah. Sounds good, y'all. Well, thanks for chatting. This has been fun.
Yeah, thanks for hosting.
Sounds good. Well, I will go look at some of those issues. I'll comment on some of those things, and so we keep that moving. I don't want to be blocking y'all. So sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Well, have a good rest of your day. Thanks everyone for coming, and we will catch you next time.
All right, bye.
Sounds good.
See ya.
See y'all.